Watching Avatar Fire and Ash, it's easy to just sit back and enjoy the visual feast without thinking too hard about what's going on. But even though we liked the movie, there were still plenty of moments that left us scratching our heads. Maybe it's just been too long since we've seen the last two Avatar movies, but the mechanics of how the exopacks actually work kind of confused us this time around. Yes, of course, we remember why they're necessary. Pandora's atmosphere is toxic to humans, thus people are required to don the masks when they're hanging out there. But when the first third or so of the movie puts such a huge emphasis on Spider making sure he has his backup mask, it's kind of an important thing to understand. Because all the movie gave us was, "Uh-oh, out of battery, might die." The Way of Water made one small reference to the need for spares.
Orphaned by the war, he was raised by the lab guys.
Spider, take your spare!
I'm Spider the village!
But beyond that, they didn't have much importance. If Spider was out, he just had a mask that worked for as long as it needed to. Here's a full explanation. The mask is attached to a hose, which connects to a filter and a power supply. There's also a high-flow valve that allows whoever's wearing one to take super deep breaths if they were exposed to Pandora air for a time. We actually see Jake use this in the first film, after Neytiri saves him from suffocating. That's what's happening in Fire and Ash every time Spider runs out of air for a while. And now, out of nowhere, it's happening constantly. Obviously, it's setting up his Navification, but the fact that the masks were basically an afterthought until they suddenly needed to be important to the plot feels a little cheap. It's also worth mentioning that older versions of the exopack didn't have a filter, but rather relied on oxygen pods that were used to refill the device. That's not the type Spider is using though, so it also makes you wonder what exactly that thing is filtering when he's underwater. Anyway, another thing we noticed as we watched Fire and Ash was all the Na'vi-sized human items, and this left us wondering where all this swag is actually from. We've seen guns and uniforms in previous movies, but this time around, pretty much everything has a conveniently sized Na'vi counterpart, all the way down to a comfy hoodie for Quaritch. There's even a custom-fitted RDA-made neck saddlebag for his Ikran. So is there some factory in Bridgehead City that's dedicated to fabricating all of this stuff? That has to be the case. The explanation for how this sort of thing would be feasible is actually in The Way of Water. Remember that part where General Ardmore is giving Recom Quaritch a tour of the city?
These swarm assemblers, they can put up a building in 6 days. We have done more here in a year than in the previous 30 years.
Considering how quickly things can be erected thanks to the swarm assemblers and 3D printers and whatever else, we suppose it would make sense that they would eventually build a production center for Na'vi human gear. But none of this is explained in Fire and Ash, so we're supposed to just take it as a given. Not that this is integral to understanding the story or anything, mind you. Just something we noticed. Here's one thing that kind of got forgotten by everyone in the movies. Are they even still making avatars anymore? The first movie obviously went to a lot of trouble to explain all the technology in a way that more or less made sense, and in universe, the RDA went to huge expense to make the program happen, even shipping Jake 26 trillion miles out to Pandora because that was cheaper than starting from scratch with a new avatar. The infrastructure to make the program happen was a massive investment, and then they just stopped because one dude went native. In the next two movies, the motives of the RDA on the Avatar front are just a big game of Hunt Jake.
If you're any clone of mine, you'll be looking for some payback, and Jake Sully would be at the top of that list.
They whipped up a batch of recoms, but instead of fortifying those numbers with more Avatar soldiers equipped to handle Pandora's hostile environment, they simply send Quaritch and his friends out with a crew of humans in exosuits. Even if Grace's science program dedicated to studying the Na'vi went belly up, you'd think the RDA would get a better return on their investment by pumping out avatars to protect their operations. But by the time the events of Fire and Ash roll around, nobody even seems to remember that they have the ability to do that. Eywa connects all living things on Pandora, sort of like a mycelium mesh that flows through everything. With that and the whole souls of the ancestors thing, you expect that generational knowledge gets passed around all the time. Even so, we kind of have to question how deep-sea squids know what sky people are. Actually, backing up a little, Sky People is obviously the name the Na'vi have for humans. At least it's what the Amatakaya and Metkaina call them, which is our main frame of reference. But the Ash clan is an outlier. They don't hang around swapping campfire tales with the reef folk. So at the very beginning, it makes you wonder how Varang knows so much about the Sky People when she marvels at the fact that Spider can breathe without a mask.
How do you still live, breather?
Then turns around and acts like she's never seen a gun before. If she's seen the little pink people, she's definitely seen them with weapons, you know? It's like knowing that cats clean themselves by licking, and then immediately going, "What the hell? A tail?" You could get past that. Maybe she knows what guns are and is just excited to see one. But even more baffling than that is when the squids rise from the deep and Kiri sicks them on the submarines by saying, and we quote, "Kill the Sky People." How do they immediately know what that lingo means? The next confusing thing has to do with Quaritch and the overall timeline of events. From the get-go, we see that Quaritch is now fluent in Na'vi. Not too surprising if you don't stop to really think about it. He's a cunning guy, and he's always obviously made it a point to know his enemies. But if you do stop to think about it, it doesn't really make much sense. When Jake learned, he was going off of intensive language training during his time with Grace. And even then,
Took a few years to get the language through my thick skull.
a few years. And remember, Fire and Ash takes place directly after the events of The Way of Water, as in like a week later, if that. And in the last movie, Quaritch knows a little Na'vi, but not enough to have conversations with them on his own. Sure, he knows enough words to get his points across.
Bitutan, Eywa mum, homi paspono.
But still, he's not anywhere near good enough to comprehend Na'vi when it's spoken to him.
Now what's he saying?
So how the heck was Quaritch able to skip ahead to his last Rosetta Stone lesson and all of a sudden master the entire language? Is there some deleted scene where he has his brain updated via software like Neo in The Matrix?
Whoa.
Yeah, doubtful. Lo'ak spends much of the runtime trying to live up to his father's expectations, or at the very least convincing his father to see that he's worthy. At the beginning of the film, he gets a chewing out because he forgot to wear his walkie-talkie, leading Jake to say, under no uncertain terms, that he doesn't trust him. By the end though, all is well. Lo'ak becomes his dad's wingman and holds his own in the fight against the RDA. But along the way, he does something that no one in his position would ever do. He leaves Took alone while a literal battle rages around them.
Okay, what does that always say?
Silly stick together.
You probably remember the scene. They're all running to the ocean. Kiri jumps in, followed by Spider. Then Lo'ak, determined to be the protector of his family, turns to his little sister. They're lit by the flames of airships falling around them like meteors. Death is raining down on them, and he says, "Don't follow us," and plops into the water, leaving Took to cower behind a rock and hope a bomb or a chunk of metal doesn't fall on her, or any of the hundreds of bad guys don't find her. Jake never finds out, and it's all good in the end. But man, what a head-scratcher. In Fire and Ash, Eywa is strangely absent for much of the film. It's not until Kiri fights her way into connecting with her that she decides to help out. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you consider how integral her role is in Na'vi's defense of their homeland in The Way of Water. In that movie, Eywa basically acts like an immune system, easily able to identify the RDA gunships whenever they show up in the Hallelujah Mountains and thwart them by telling the Na'vi where they are.
Our hardware really stirs up the hornet's nest. We only get 10 minutes in enemy airspace, they are all over us.
This ability of hers is the main reason why the RDA has to make recoms in the first place. Since she can effortlessly detect anything that isn't visibly native to Pandora, they have to trick her. So why is she not interested in helping at first? As far as we can tell, there's no explanation for this during Fire and Ash's 3-hour and 12-minute runtime. She's still the underlying centerpiece of the entire ecosystem, so you'd think she'd still be pretty invested in its well-being, as opposed to some god safely watching all the madness from up in the sky somewhere. Another moment that kinda threw us off was the scene where Scoresby is totally blindsided by the Tolkien attack. Yes, the Tolkien don't usually fight,
Do they ever fight back? Nah, I never seen them lift a fin.
but they do in The Way of Water, and it's pretty rad. Payakan, the young Tolkien that Lo'ak befriends earlier in the movie, attacks the Sea Dragon vessel after Scoresby hunts some of his fellow Tolkien and tags him for future capture. His surprise attack is actually what sets the climax of the movie in motion. Remember, the events of that movie take place only a week or so before the events of Fire and Ash, so there's no reason Scoresby should be as surprised as he is. And he was right there when Pyre Khan threw down.
Now! Bloody hell!
Seriously, even Cheech and Chong would be able to remember that far back. When we were all first introduced to the kuru, the fleshy little appendage that grows out of the backs of Na'vi heads, it was pretty clear what they were for. They connect to other creatures on Pandora, like an intimate neural handshake that allows you to ride Ikran or Taurox or whatever. Then it became clear that they connect to Na'vi a little more romantically. Fire and Ash introduces a new element that was probably one of the best additions to the lore, but raises a lot of questions. Varang tortures prisoners by connecting her kuru to theirs and doing something. The fact that she then severs the prisoners' kurus is actually even worse, but it makes you wonder what's happening in their minds when Varang forces them to bend to her will. Is that actually what's going on? A battle of wills and Varang is genuinely the strongest will in that fight? By the time Kiri turns the tables on her and domineers Varang with the same method, that definitely appears to be the case. But Fire and Ash is pretty content to leave the specifics open-ended. Speaking of that ending with Varang, we can't help but feel like the movie did audiences a little dirty by having her just scamper off into the night, never to be seen again. She was easily the best addition to the film, and we all spent about 3 hours watching her build into a terrifying villain with an unhinged grasp on reality. And then, she's gone. This is confusing from a screenwriting standpoint. Why wouldn't you give her the climactic finale she deserves? She could have been commandeering droves of self-immolating dive bombers for a good while before anyone got tired of seeing that. It's okay to let her live, but we would have loved to see her get some time to shine near the end. Kind of the same gripe for Quaritch, but his open-ended quote-unquote death isn't really unexpected. It leaves a door open for him to come back if Cameron wants him to, or merely live on as a jerk in the mind of his son if Cameron wants to go in a different direction with future movies. And we suppose that was the same reasoning for Varang simply melting into the shadows, but she could have definitely gone out with more of a bang.